Real Talk starts right now. Here's Ryan Jesperson.
It's Friday. A good Friday to you. We hope that this podcast, this live stream finds you well. Ryan Jesperson here with John Hicks in just a second. Dr. Bradley Martin, a family doctor, and then we've got a roundtable of mayors here. We're going to be talking about rural politics. Not rural. That's not true necessarily. We're going to be talking about small and medium-sized communities and the politics right now of the social issues, things like homelessness, things like healthcare, the opioid crisis. We are armed with a ton of emails, feedback from you, Real Talkers, that we keep an eye on. Sometimes, you may write into the show to talk@ryanjesperson.com, and then you may not hear your email for a while. Of course, we'd love to read everything that we get. We can't read it all, but sometimes there will be a message that resonates with us, and we'll hang on to it, John. We'll essentially pin it to our board, and it becomes part of our working list for content. So we're going to be hearing from some audience members today in relation to some of the subject matter we're talking about. For example, Angie, we're going to be reading your email today about stopping the harm, the opioid crisis, your son who's living on the streets right now. I'm looking forward to that. That's real life. That's real stuff. We're going to get to some of your comments on my interview with Danielle Smith yesterday. She's seeking the United Conservative Party's leadership, and Mark Cherrington, too. How about him, a human rights advocate? A Real Talker by the name of Jennifer wrote in after the show. She says, Mark Cherrington was not on my radar. I had no idea who that guy was. She tuned in for the Danielle Smith interview. She says, now that guy is a legend. I saw Avnish Nanda, who's a well-known litigator. He's a lawyer, and Avnish does a lot of pro bono work, quite frankly, does a lot of work looking out for people that might otherwise not have legal representation or might be hammered with issues. They don't know how to respond. He's one of those kind of guys. You've seen him on the show several times. He called Mark Cherrington an icon this morning in sharing our interview content with his followers on social media, which we sure appreciate. Well, why don't we get to it? I wanted to get to a couple of emails. It's relatively rare that we'll start a show with emails, but we want to set the table for Dr. Bradley Martin. The doc and I don't have a script. We don't have a whole bunch of talking points we're going to get to. We just want to shoot the shit, basically. He's a real talker. He joins us live every single morning, and he sees what's happening in healthcare on the front lines. He's a healthcare practitioner. He runs his own practice. For that matter, he's also an entrepreneur and a small businessman. Just like every other family physician across the province and, for that matter, across the country. So I speak with Danielle Smith yesterday. You probably know. Feels like most people in Alberta at least heard of the interview, if not checked it out. Randy wrote in to say, I listened to your interview with Danielle Smith. It was my first time tuning into Real Talk since you left the air on Chorus Radio. He says, I've never been one to write emails offering my opinion to anybody until COVID began. But listening to Real Talk irritated me. First off, you read an email that referred to her supporters as lunatics, and that's a perfect example of the dysfunction in society. Why can't we have a discussion with people that we don't agree with 100%? Danielle made it pretty clear that her partnership with Theron Fleury, they met at a stage last night, that rally down in Calgary. It was to help people dealing with mental health issues that they had through the craziness of the last 2 years. But as a typical member of the mainstream media, you attacked her on the more controversial opinions that Theo holds. You didn't promote the potential good he might have to offer people dealing with mental health issues. Randy says we're in this mess of division in our society precisely because of this. We got to focus on what people have to offer instead of what causes this division. Now, of course, I have a whole bunch to say about that, and you probably do too, but I'm going to keep reading the email. It's not the point. He says you pushed hard on Danielle's proposed Sovereignty Act, Alberta Sovereignty Act. And again, I feel like she answered every one of your questions competently. I can't understand how you and some of your audience don't see why Alberta should be more forceful in our demands with Ottawa. This happened in the 80s with Trudeau Sr. and now with Trudeau Jr. We have these politicians that promise to stand up for Alberta but never accomplish anything, and Danielle was absolutely correct that we've been living with a lawless government over the past 2 years. A bunch of you took issue with that statement of hers. He says what's most disturbing is that the government doesn't seem to follow the law and nobody speaks out or stands up or holds them back. Whether or not you agree with the position of people who didn't want to get vaccinated, my position is their rights were violated through the pandemic and nobody's defending them. I mean, except for the whole trucker convoy, but I defend. He says they've now been called lunatics and a fringe minority and vilified by the rest of the population, judging these people and casting them aside instead of trying to look for commonalities. Over what? I've had friends lose their jobs. The mainstream media making them out to be subhuman the entire time. And as for your assertion, Ryan, that approximately 90% of Albertans got vaccinated or are on board with it, that's total bullshit, says Randy. Many people that I've had conversations with about getting vaccinated says the number one reason they did was to travel or to keep their job. Sure, there was a fair amount maybe that got vaccinated of their own free will, but from my context, I'd make an educated guess that 40% got it to be able to maintain their lifestyles, or they were coerced to keep their jobs. So stop telling people that 90% were on board, because it's not true at all. I mean, what I said was about 90% of people are vaccinated, so vaccine mandates are less relevant now than they were before, but I digress. He says, I believe that if Danielle does get a chance to lead this province and we can get some support from Albertans not on the wagon just yet, she'll return us to better days. But it's going to take a little faith. And your podcast demonstrates how people stand against her. But you can't deny her honesty and genuine concern for where we are headed as a province and as a nation. Start looking for things we can agree on, not things that divide us. For the sake of this province or for a future we can be proud of. Stop attacking good people who want to bring prosperity and well-being to all the wonderful Albertans, even the ones we disagree with. That from Randy. Thanks for your email. Allie wrote in to say, I'm sure you're going to be swamped with responses to your Danielle Smith interview. We were, but I wanted to throw my 2 cents. She says, I'm a critical care, ER, registered nurse who for the majority of my life has identified as a white conservative Christian. I actually worked on Ed Stelmach's campaign for party leadership, which, of course, we were talking about Steady Eddie. His campaign was an example of one of those that came up the middle. People were talking about some of the perceived stars in the conservative movement in Alberta at that time. Jim Dinning, Gary Marr. Ed Stelmach was not a name they were mentioning, no disrespect. But he was second choice on a whole bunch of ballots. And he won. Back to Allie's email. She says, until recent years, I did not see a day where I wouldn't vote conservative. But I've never felt so disrespected by a politician than I felt during your interview with Danielle Smith. And considering what both Premier Kenney and former Health Minister Shandro have said about us healthcare workers and nurses, I feel like that the bar was already set. AHS, Alberta Health Services, is responsible and mismanaged the pandemic because there were empty beds in rural hospitals with no respiratory therapists, no ability to escalate, no advanced oxygenation therapies, no critical care capacity. So obviously, leadership and AHS lied and said we had nothing more to give? Go fuck yourself, Danielle. I held the hands of hundreds of Albertans as they fought for their lives. Many of them died. I worked thousands of hours over this pandemic and hundreds of forced overtime hours where I didn't have the right to leave my place of employment and go home to my family because we were so overwhelmed. Where were my human rights in that situation? If Danielle cares so much about mental health, I and so many of my coworkers are diagnosed with PTSD. We had time off that we needed to preserve our mental health denied because the need for our skills was too great. And then to top it off, people like her spouting stupidity contributed to an environment where we got death threats screamed into our faces. I was spat on as I tried to walk from my parking lot to work a forced overtime shift. Apologize to the pastors. Where's my apology? Where's the apology for the families who had to deal with that bullshit protest when they were coming to say goodbye to their loved ones? Danielle's not a stupid woman by any means, so the only conclusion I can come to for what she's saying is willful ignorance to push an agenda. Ambulances are absolutely a problem, like she said, but does she really think we would have all missed so simple of a solution to the problem? What she's talking about is called consolidation. We already do it. So firstly, not every paramedic can take 4 patients. That's dependent on scope, and in places, where there's 8 beds so they can staff them for EMS download. There's already a community paramedic program running in the city of Edmonton that does exactly what she's talking about in terms of treating in place to avoid hospitalization. Interfacility transfers typically aren't coming from the same pool as the guys on the road responding to emergency calls. And transfers are suspended when emergency demand is too high to meet. So for someone trying to sell herself as a premier, she needs to have a more full understanding of the problem she's trying instead of suggesting solutions already in place. After listening to this interview, I have to admit that as an educated, dedicated, skilled professional in my early 30s, I don't know that I see myself continuing to live in a province that elects someone like her as our leader. That makes me so sad because I truly love Albertans and was once so proud to be from here. I hope there's a day in the future I can feel that way again. That from Allie, who worked on Ed Stelmach's leadership campaign. This one from signed off, centrist, sick and tired of the bullshit. They've asked I not use their real name. It's a beautiful name, I love the name, but I can't use it. It's a very unique name. It's like there might be like 3 people in the province that have this name, so I'm not going to say it. But I'm so tempted to say it. I was completely disgusted, Ryan, by the feedback I saw online following your interview with Danielle Smith. A bit of background, I was involved in a campaign for the Progressive Conservatives during the 2012 election. You remember that was the election. A lot of people thought Danielle Smith and the Wild Rose Party might win until Alan Huntsberger out of South Edmonton, his thing about the lake of fire surfaced, right? Like 5 days before the election. So this centrist says, I've never had a positive thing to say about Danielle Smith. This UCP leadership election is not comparable to the federal Conservative leadership. The winner of this contest automatically becomes the Premier of Alberta. Politically engaged people assume everyone knows everything about candidates. I can tell you from experience that most people know nothing about the person they vote for on election day. When we so-called deplatform people we don't agree with, we're not accomplishing what we think we are. Just look south of the border. If engaged Albertans start stating we can't listen to candidates for premier, we will never have the province we want. I'm no fan of Danielle Smith. The fight with the feds is ridiculous. One-room schoolhouses is a terrible idea, but we should listen to what she has to say and then rebut with facts. That from centrist, sick and tired of this bullshit. And I had to read this one from an appreciative Albertan who says today's show, they're talking about Thursday, was awesome, all caps. They say you brought the narrative back to point when the guest was grandstanding and fear-mongering. So the current government messed up absolutely everything. What? This coming from an elected politician who crossed the floor and those who voted for her? Blah, blah, blah. We all have voices. We all have a vote. Real talk helps elevate those voices as it should be. And we need more Mark Cherringtons. And that's why I subscribe to and listen to Real Talk. Have a very best rest of the day. That from an appreciative Albertan. Thank you for that. We're going to bring you just a quick highlight from that interview yesterday in just a second to tee up Dr. Bradley Martin. But first, I'll remind you that this show doesn't happen without the support and commitment of sponsors like Apex Automation. We're so excited to welcome them to the fold. Apex is hiring right now. They're looking for the most talented, skilled, motivated engineers in Canada. They do work across North America, and they're growing their footprint beyond that, providing fully autonomous, intuitive solutions to industry. They're giving people back their time, not just their clients, but their staff as well. And they know the secret to doing that is people. They help their clients, they help their partners become more efficient and more profitable. Meantime, their employees are achieving great things, reaching their full potential. Flexible hours, professional development opportunities, and a fun corporate culture. Trust me, I host their Christmas party. It's off the rails. You can learn more about career opportunities at Apex Automation by visiting apexautomation.ca today. John, what do you figure we should talk about with the Dairy Queens of Northwest Edmonton and Sherwood Park today, pal? It's the type of weekend. I was checking the forecast. If you live in our neck of the woods, it's an ice cream kind of a weekend. But it's also a flamethrower, signature stack burger kind of a weekend. If you like your burger to clap back at you, you like your tongue to feel like it's burning, baby, we recommend the Flamethrower Signature Stack Burger, the loaded steakhouse burger. You can't go wrong with that one either. Topped with that signature Dairy Queen onion ring on top of the all-beef patties, the cheese, the bacon, and, of course, fresh Dairy Queen fries. Maybe grab a Lipton Brisk, or even better, treat yourself to a Blizzard. My recommendation this week has been the chocolate peanut drumstick Dairy Queen Blizzard at the Dairy Queens in Palisades, Nemeo, Newcastle, Westmount, and Baseline Road. And if grocery shopping is on your list this weekend, we absolutely insist. If you have a Friesen Brothers anywhere near you and you've never gone, make it this weekend. Friesen Brothers knows that really great conversations happen over really great food. And they've been making sure that Albertans have had that great food they expect. Produce, protein, baking. I mean, they know sourdough like nobody else does. For the last 65 years or so, still family-owned. Friesen Brothers is online at friesen.com. You can learn more about their signature barbecue sauce if you're going to be firing up the grill this week. And don't forget, 2 weeks from now, the first of the month, it's 15% off for every grocery purchase over $75. That's at Friesen Brothers. You know, there's a fabulous Friesen Brothers in Hinton, Alberta.
Fort Sask, too.
Yeah, but I'm teeing up our next guest.
You told me that.
Yeah. Fort Sask, South
I'm
Edmonton.
going to do I'm going to tour.
You know who's choked about this? You know who's choked about all this talk? Is Real Talkers down in Calgary. Because they don't yet have a Friesen Brothers in Calgary City proper. And I don't blame the Calgarians that tune into Real Talk. We love you guys. They're sitting here going, like, how great can a grocery store be? Well, pretty great.
Yeah.
Pretty great.
But we have the Stampede.
They do have the Stampede. Final Stampede weekend coming up this weekend. The Dash for Cash, the Rangeland Derby, Sunday night. Big deal. Oh, really? You're not a big Stampede guy? Okay, got it. Johnny's cracking Red Bulls. The last half hour of the show is going to be a good one. We'll get to Dr. Bradley Martin in just a second. You want to tee up that clip for me? Talking to Danielle Smith yesterday, this is an interesting one. This was one of those moments in the interview where as a person asking the questions, you go, oh boy. Some folks, legal experts, have suggested that this comment could lead to a lawsuit, not aimed at me, aimed at the guest. We'll see. This is Danielle Smith talking about healthcare, specifically the former CEO of Alberta Health Services.
We have to challenge Alberta Health Services. They are either incompetent or they went out of their way to sabotage the UCP government. I watched the very first press conference that the Premier gave back in March or April, where he gave direct instruction to Alberta Health Services to increase the number of ICU beds by 1,089. And then I think everybody was going along thinking they were working on finding that surge capacity. Then when the Delta variant came along last fall, we found out that not only had they not increased ICU beds, they had decreased them. And I've spent a lot of time talking to frontline nurses and doctors, especially in rural areas. And they told me that their facilities were empty. So Alberta Health Services, I think, let us all down by failing to find that surge capacity. We gave them lots of money, lots of time. And I think that that's where we should be focusing our effort.
You don't really think that Alberta Health Services was trying to sabotage the government, do you?
I don't know how to interpret it any other way. All I do know is that Dr. Verno Yu was let go a year before her contract extension was up. So somebody's come to the same conclusion I has, that she just wasn't up for the job.
Yeah, someone trying to save his own political skin, probably, don't you think? I mean, that's what prompted this entire leadership race.
I look at the facts, and the facts are they were given a direct instruction to increase surge capacity, and they failed. They reduced surge capacity, or they reduced ICU capacity, and that's unacceptable.
Dr. Bradley Martin, a born and raised Albertan, completed his medical training at the University of Alberta. He's been practicing in Hinton ever since then. He works at the clinic, he works in the hospital, and he also attends the Mountain Cree camp to deliver care a few times a year. He's a proud husband, a proud father, he says, to 3 girls and also 2 cats. And he's a very good friend of this show. Doc, welcome back. It's nice to see your face.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Is my sound okay?
Yeah, your sound's great. You were watching the interview yesterday. But you and I, on purpose, didn't want to talk too much ahead of time about what we're going to get to. We want to treat this like we're out for coffees or out for beers. So your thoughts on the interview yesterday?
Yeah. First off, I just want to say I realize I'm in Supriya's usual spot, so pressure's on.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, that point. So thanks for reading my mind. That point particularly was of interest. And I want to start off by saying, I mean, I don't want to just lash out at Danielle Smith without her being here to defend that, but there's some points that just aren't based in reality, and that was one of them. Yeah, it's going to sound like a trash talk already, but yeah. So Alberta Health Services, if Jason Kenney ever told us, get 1,089 beds, well, that's pie in the sky. I mean, how is that possible? A bed isn't just a bed. It's people, it's staffing, it's resources. Rural Alberta has 0 capacity for ICU beds, so 100% never can happen. We don't have respiratory therapists that staff hospitals 24/7. We don't have ICU critical care docs. We don't have any of that. So it doesn't matter if our facilities are empty, which they weren't. I mean, we have slow days like anybody else, but we're rural Alberta. It's not going to be packed all the time, but we're pretty busy. I mean, my hospital right now is on outbreak with COVID. We can't admit more patients. We're not allowed to. They can come to our emerge, but we can't keep them in our hospital.
Doctor, currently it's on outbreak?
Currently, yeah, as of a day or two ago, like we're just fresh back into it. And this is probably the 3rd time it's happened. So we have a time where it can be several days where we can't admit patients. But I mean, for anybody, a politician, to just say increase capacity, triple, quadruple, whatever capacity, and then we don't do it, and it's all of a sudden we failed. Well, no, the resources just aren't there. We do not have the docs. I mean, I don't even have to mention the fact with Chandro and now with Minister Copping and the docs leaving the province. I mean, we've got evidence that that's the case. Even if that weren't happening, we wouldn't have had the resources to with that kind of ask. And ICU beds didn't increase; they decreased. The only concern with it is the increase in ICU beds. They had a lot fewer people covering each one. Most ICU patients get one-to-one nursing care. I don't know if that was the case throughout the whole pandemic. It couldn't have been. But I don't work in the big center, so I can't comment on that directly. But they were flying throughout all this.
There's this sort of idea that you can just shuffle things around, and I just want to return to the concept of, or not the concept, but like to the mandate to add ICU beds. So can you give us, like, us civilians that really have no idea the difference between ER and ICU, or what an ICU bed represents, or can you actually kind of dumb it down? For those of us that wouldn't have sort of an intricate working knowledge of what would be involved there, just so we understand the magnitude of if you're going to add 8 or 80 or 800 ICU beds, like what would, just to a civilian, what would you have to do?
Yeah, I can break that down a little bit. If you get an ICU doc on here, they can do it better, or an ICU nurse,
sure,
even better. They could get a better sense. But basically, you have a bed, which is literally a bed in a hospital. It's hooked up, to oxygen, to different things on the wall. But to be an ICU bed, you have to have the access to have sometimes special amounts of oxygen, sometimes dialysis right there in that bed. That's, tens, hundreds of thousands of dollars for those machines. Just different equipment that doesn't exist, different drugs that don't always exist in rural Alberta or emergency centers, but probably there are some antibiotics I know that are only in ICUs because they're so rare and they're so needed sometimes. So lots of equipment that just doesn't exist. Like, you look into an ICU room in the city, 90% of what's in it probably doesn't exist in rural Alberta or even other parts of that hospital. But the biggest thing is the care. The physicians that train for the ICU are usually internal medicine docs or anesthesiologist docs with 5 years residency on top of a med school with special fellowships, likely in critical care. So very highly trained. Same with the nurses. ICU nurses, they deliver one-to-one care. They have specific knowledge and specific ability to set up all that equipment. So for costs, I would say you're probably looking at hundreds of thousands of dollars per bed to even get that per bed at the very least. And, tens of years of training per bed. I mean, the ICU docs cover, a big area of the ICU, but the ICU nurses, that's usually one-to-one.
So how does it usually work, Doc? Like if somebody in Hinton is requiring ICU care, is that airlift? Is that how that is handled?
Yeah, typically, sometimes depending on their nature, we can ground ambulance them, but if they're needed to get there quickly, it's usually airlift to Grand Prairie or Edmonton. Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. And so with regards, I am putting you on the spot here. I'm sort of interviewing
no worries.
I'm interviewing you almost like I would interview the AHS CEO, because I'm asking you numbers and things like. If you don't know, just go, oh man, I don't know. But so you mentioned Grand Prairie, for example. That's a city of like almost 100. I think it's like 80,000 people or something, isn't it? Grand Prairie is a decent sized center.
Yeah, something like that.
It's like approximately ish the size of Red Deer. So you've got ICUs in what? Grand Prairie, Red Deer, I would imagine, like, does Lethbridge probably have ICU beds? Calgary and Edmonton obviously do. Is that kind of ish?
Yeah, I think Lethbridge and Medicine Hat both do as well.
Okay.
The only thing I can state, and I might be way off base stating this, is the acuity of those ICU beds aren't necessarily what you're going to get in Edmonton or Calgary. But they do have high acuity there. They can, because I've sent COVID positive needing respiratory care to Grand Prairie before. So, but they don't have as many high acuity ICU beds. That's really going to be in your big centers.
Okay. Anything else from the interview yesterday that you wanted to touch on?
Lots and lots.
Let's go, man. What are you waiting for?
Well, what I'll do is I'll touch on specifically the things that are kind of in my lane, because I had some things to say about a lot of it.
No. Hang on a second. You don't have to touch on things that stay in your lane. There's no such thing. No. Like what inspired you the most? What pissed you off the most? What did you want to talk about the most? It doesn't have to just be about medicine.
Okay, well, I was listening to the interview and taking notes, so I'll just go chronologically. One of the points was, and this is actually, it's a point for a lot of people, both on the sides of wanting to be vaccinated, wanting to wear masks, and the people that were opposed to that. The whole protect the vulnerable, and Mrs. Smith mentioned that yesterday about, okay, can't blame the government for the first few months of the pandemic efforts, but then after that, hey, should just worked on protecting the vulnerable. 70 plus. I can't remember how she worded it, but basically saying let's lock down or let's help the the people in the care homes. But that's not what our vulnerable is. Our vulnerable is, we have people with physical disabilities that are young, children that are immunocompromised. We have elderly that are immunocompromised. Our vulnerable don't exist in just care homes. They don't exist in bubbles. They exist everywhere. You can't go down a street in Alberta without somebody that would be considered vulnerable. So if you want to protect the vulnerable, you have to protect everybody because the vulnerable are everywhere. I just think that point is really, it's an easy point to say, we just have to do that. Well, that is a huge task. So that's one point. Talking about the ICU beds, that's, you can't just snap your fingers and make that happen. That's pretty tough. That's pretty tough. The rural doctors that she supposedly spoke to, there are some docs that are on side with some of the anti-vaccine mandates and things like that, but they're in the minority. I can tell you that. And
well, you can always find someone.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. I mean, I'll find you a pastor that doesn't believe God exists. I guarantee it. I could do it by the end of next week and bring him on the show. I mean, they might be right, but I digress. But the point, whoa! But the point is, you can always find someone to say something easily.
Absolutely. And that's exactly it. So I don't know who she's been speaking to, and I don't know if I represent rural docs, but here I am. A guy with a beard and a plaid shirt, that's got to be pretty rural. So I don't know.
Can you swing an axe, Brad?
I can.
Can you change a tire? No.
I can.
What else got under your skin?
So the comparison, and she had you gave her a couple of times to get out of this one or to get some facts back into it, but the influenza versus COVID. It's not a comparison. It isn't. I mean, influenza has hit us, but when you go look back to all the data for influenza in the past decade, the deaths for influenza are a fraction of what COVID's been in a year. And we've had almost 3 years of it now. So there is no comparison. And then she started listing off random viruses. She's just looking at a sheet that has names of viruses, because some of those viruses are common cold viruses, but they've never been problems like that.
But it's more than just deaths, isn't it? Like if you're going to compare influenza, like let's call it the flu, right? If you're going to compare influenza to COVID or the flu to COVID, it's more than just deaths. There's different levels of like how contagious it is, how it spreads, how it mutates, how it impacts, right? I mean, there's a whole bunch of considerations to make.
Oh, totally. Yeah. Influenza for the mutating part, as far as I know, influenza actually mutates a bit more than COVID, but it hasn't been as nasty as far as detriment side effects. And, I've seen some people, with bad influenza that have had outcomes that last a bit longer, but I've never seen anything like what COVID can do.
Okay.
A year out. So I've had people that still aren't back to snuff, and that's just it. Death's a number, whereas actual disability and whatnot, that's hard to quantify. And that's a very real thing. The other point, EMS, talking about paramedics taking on 4 people. Again, it's bodies. We don't have enough bodies in EMS. And that's just, again, pie in the sky. It's just never going to happen. We could triple our EMS numbers and we're never going to get to that level. It's just demand on hospitals. We have a lot. I do agree with the point that we need more of these workers, but we need to go about it in a way to actually recruit and retain these people. EMS, they just don't get paid nearly enough to do the job that they do. I wouldn't do their job for twice what I make. So,
hey, this is a rude question, but do you happen to know approximately what a paramedic might make, like a starting wage and like 10 years in?
Ryan, I looked at that number a couple days ago, and it's I can't remember. I'd be guessing if I said that now.
Yeah, like would you ballpark? Like would a paramedic start making like 55 or 68 or 75 or like?
I think it would depend on, so if they're ALS, the paramedics with more training, I think they'd start more than that would be my guess.
ALS is advanced life support, right?
Yeah, the advanced life support. So they don't have as many of those ratio wise in the big cities because BLS can quickly get people to the hospitals, whereas ALS, they have more life support capabilities.
Okay.
So they'd start higher than that would be my suspicion, but yeah. I don't have a good.
Okay. Yeah. I was just curious if you knew.
But one thing I would know is, we see even in rural Hinton, like we see, May long weekend, we have dunes out here, people dying on quads. Like we see a lot of stuff that come into emerge. It's pretty bad, but we don't see anything what the EMS do, because they'll see things out there. If people are dead on arrival, they don't even come to my hospital. So you couldn't pay me enough to do that job to begin with. So I think they need to change the way they're managing that. And then, they're talking, the other talking point with the EMS that was brought up yesterday was talking about their overhead doctor that they can call. And, if that doctor, agrees with certain things, can start to manage. Well, most docs don't like to manage people for a long time when they can't actually lay eyes on the patient. So I don't know how feasible that is. And that doc's got to be on call for a lot of Alberta. It's not too many docs that are working, coordinating stars. They can't just be on the line, with 2 patients in a hospital. They have to cover, as far as I know, most of the province at times. So there's not too many of them that work at any one time. I'm gonna go to education for a second, if that's all right.
Man, you're ready. I go. You promised us a trash talk. Like, I just feel like you're being so professional and reasonable, and I don't want to say I'm disappointed, but
okay, no, I'll bring it a little bit more, but. Glamorizing the fucking 1900s. I mean, what educational standards would we have if we actually had one teacher to teach 6 grades at once with 10 kids in a classroom? It's just fucking ridiculous. Like, I don't understand how she said that as a positive to say that's what we need to get back to. That's just insane. There's nothing, I don't like to be rhetorical. I don't like to say things about people that are conservative just because I'm not. I don't like that. But you can't have bullshit arguments. You have to have some evidence. And I know you've spoken to that before, Ryan. Evidence-based policy is the way to go on anything. But that's just wackadoodle. That's that. The Janssen vaccine, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, she's mentioned that as well. And it doesn't work as well. It just doesn't. The other thing too, what the funny thing is a lot of people that were kind of anti-vaccine wanted that vaccine because they were scared of the side effects of the Moderna, the Pfizer, the AstraZeneca. But the research showed that not only did the Johnson & Johnson one not work as well, it actually had more of those side effects. So it's kind of ridiculous.
For people that aren't familiar, the context that vaccine came up in was the $100,000 that was raised crowdfunding, and wondering where that money went. If people missed that, it's worth a listen.
Yeah, and the funny thing with that one too is that brought her to talk about the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Alberta, the CPSA, and doctors being worried about being blacklisted and losing their licenses. Well, I can tell you something. And she said about freedom to treat, and that we have that. I have crazy freedom to treat. I can treat a lot.
What's freedom to treat? What does that mean?
Well, she mentioned it yesterday, saying, I think, and this is me guessing, but I think it was a read between the lines of docs should be able to use ivermectin, things like that. I think that's what she was referring to. But freedom to treat, that's my job. I have to look at a patient. I have guidelines for certain treatments, but I go against guidelines a lot when I've got the patient in front of me that has a different spin on things. I can treat however I like. But
what would happen if you administered ivermectin? This is a horse medication for people.
Yeah,
this is what President Trump at the time was suggesting should be.
So that's just it. It's I wouldn't want to treat with that. There's no evidence that it works. There's zero. It's side effect. Yeah, I wouldn't go near it. There's evidence that it does harm in humans more so than anything. It's just not it won't work for COVID anyway. So yes, we do have certain limits that if we use certain things that are proven to be ineffective for certain things, we can definitely get our hands slapped for that. But so I don't know if that's what she was getting at or not.
Can you? How does it work as physicians? Brad, how does it work as a physician? Like if you believed in, I'm going to say a few words that might bring people out, and but I want to get specific and cut to the chase. Like, and this is not disparaging anybody. I know a lot of people believe this stuff works for sure, but like if you integrated like a more holistic approach, so say for example, someone comes to you with a health issue, and you say, I could prescribe you this. I think this is going to work. Here's the treatment we're going to pursue. But I also think, we're going to do a little like craniosacral work, or we're going to do some like energy work or some Reiki or whatever. Like you sort of integrate that other stuff into your practice. Do doctors have the freedom to do that sort of a thing? Do you risk yourself being hauled in front of the college? Like how much wiggle room do doctors have with regards to the conviction of how you practice and the prescriptions, so to speak, or the advice that you give?
So specifically that last point, the advice we give and whatnot, we have almost unlimited freedom. There isn't really anything as long as we're not being unprofessional about it. So you're not being untoward, attitude-wise, disrespecting people for various reasons.
Right.
But what we are allowed to tell patients, there's nobody that can stop us from saying whatever we like. So we have, almost to a fault. I mean, if anything, there would be more control on how doctors can practice, truth be told. But saying things like Reiki and things like that, I don't think there's anything stopping us from doing that kind of care. The biggest thing would be we wouldn't be allowed to charge for that kind of care.
I see.
And that's what I have, issue with naturopathic doctors as well. They make money on whatever they recommend, or they sell you a bottle of magnesium that costs $60. That's the same as the Jameson brand vitamins on the shelf. People actually think that Canadian physicians make money on prescriptions. I don't make a cent. If I could prescribe you 300 medications at once, I wouldn't make a penny.
Right.
The only thing I get paid for is my time with the patient. But yeah, we have a lot of freedom to do that, but we also have to make sure that we're not doing harm with that too. So unproven methods, things like that. A lot of it, thankfully, doesn't really harm somebody. But it doesn't necessarily help. But it's when we start to doing unproven methods that actually have negative health implications for our patients, that's when we would get in trouble. And I would definitely consider ivermectin to be in that camp for sure.
I want to make sure we don't leave something on your list that you're keeping without it. What's one other big one that's jumping off that list you want to make sure we talk about?
I'm just looking at my list right here. I wanted to say the health spending account thing I thought was interesting. I'm not necessarily against that one. I think
it's a great idea, actually.
I think it could be, but I think the implementation of it's going to be important. So I think like a family, each person having some money for the things that aren't covered by healthcare, I think that's not a bad idea. My solution would be, let's try to work to get those things covered by healthcare. Chiropractor, some of the chiropractors are less evidence-based than others, but things like massage, physiotherapy, dental care, I mean, I'm all for that being covered under the healthcare plan. In lieu of that happening, though, some money towards that I think is okay. But I just like with that kind of money spent, we like our regular healthcare system, the emergency, being in hospital beds, we have however many million of people, 4 million people in Alberta. Not all 4 million people seek healthcare at all times. Most of the healthcare is utilized by a minority of people, the sickest of us.
Yeah.
So a blank spread across everybody getting that money might not be money best spent. I'm not saying that it's not a good idea. I think it could have its merit, but that kind of money could also be putting into infrastructure to actually help those programs be accessible to those who need it. And the other thing too is $300 per person. If you actually need those services, it won't actually go that far. I mean, you get a counseling session times 2, you probably owe that money already.
If you have 2 counseling sessions, you probably owe on top of the $300.
Probably. So I certainly think it's an idea worth exploring, because exploring helping people access those kinds of services that normally cost money, I think is a good idea. I think the implementation of it is probably what would fall on. The other thing too, and this is me being a lefty, so I'm just going to put my bias out there right now, is I would suspect that a government that would have that kind of spending would put that on as a line item that's spent on healthcare. That necessarily isn't. It's just given to people to potentially spend on healthcare. And I would hate to have that as a line item and say, oh, we put this towards healthcare. It's like, well, did it actually go there?
Yeah. It's like, do I get $300 if I provide receipts for $300 worth of health services? Or do I just get $300 to go buy a 27-year aged single malt? Like, that's what I need to know, right?
Exactly. So if that's a line item that's just considered spent and it actually doesn't go towards it, then it's gonna look good politically. Oh yeah, we spent all this money, but did it actually do anything? And that kind of spending too, it's hard. I'm not an expert in politics or spending by any means, but I feel like that would be hard to actually be able to find an impact on. And I think good government policy is something that you can actually track and get some evidence on how well is that working. And I think that one would be hard to follow.
It depends who your target audience is. Like if you've mastered your messaging, all you need is a few people up on stage and you say, Darla got her $300 from our government and used it to go toward her daughter's orthodontics. And everyone's like, wow, that's amazing. And Darla's like, she doesn't, and then like Jonathan used his $300 to get his sciatica treated. And then Jonathan comes up and says like, without that $300, I would have been whatever. And then they go, look at that, and then the politicians that would actually have the data and crunch the numbers to say like 17% of Albertans used their $300 to whatever. Nobody gives a fuck about that. Honestly, it's what matters. The numbers matter, but they just don't matter to people that vote. And that's kind of one of the ills about politics in my mind, is that the messaging is going to meet the audience and in a way that I think is leading to some of the woes that you hear people address in the emails to the show, and the complaints that people have about the state of politics and discourse and the polarization and the camps right now. And a big part of that is how people get their message across and what seems to land with the general public. So I don't know. I think you could spin that $1.4 billion expenditure pretty well if you've mastered your messaging. But I digress. It hasn't happened yet. She's not the premier yet. She hasn't given away the $300 per person yet. So all of this is just a hypothetical right now with you and me.
Yeah, and fair enough. And like I said, that point is probably, I think you might have said that too, is the least controversial point that she brought up. And I agree, because it could go a lot of different ways. But I think the biggest messaging that I would want to give real talkers is, the evidence-based things have to be important when it comes to healthcare. And you've had different candidates on. And that's what I wanted to mention, by the way, Ryan. You got it from both sides yesterday, having her on.
Oh yeah,
I didn't think that was
doesn't
fair.
matter. No, it doesn't matter, man. It's like I don't want to get too much into this, but people that are like, oh, you're platforming or whatever. It's like, dude, she could be the premier.
Yeah,
like if you're of the like if people that use sort of the idea of like platforming I just sort of I don't think maybe these people are just learning about talk shows. Maybe they're just sort of like don't quite understand how it all works. But I don't lose sleep over that stuff, Doc. The conversations are important. Her comments on this show yesterday resonated with hundreds of thousands of people. You should see our download numbers on the podcast. Plus, it's caught the attention of politicians and pundits. I saw David Kleimenhaga wrote about it this morning. I know that the big papers and the mainstream media outlets were quoting our interviews yesterday. So, people that tell us it's not worthwhile or it was irresponsible, quite frankly, I'm actually just going to keep it classy, Doc.
Fair enough.
But let me just say I was able to sleep soundly last night.
That's good. That's good.
Hey,
well, and my thought about that too is you don't give platform to people that already have a platform. That voice is heard. And if anything, we need to hear more from our candidates, because we need to know what they're all about. And a lot of time we're voting for people we actually haven't heard talk too much. So
yeah. All good. And as we continue to reiterate to people, this show is just one big, we stop on Friday afternoons and we pick it up again on Monday, and we do it for about 75 minutes every day, sometimes 90. And we go on and on. But all it is, man, is just one continuing conversation, right? It's not like we don't sort of close the book on an issue if we've talked about it once. And you right now are proof of that. And we appreciate that. We appreciate you returning to the show. You're certainly an audience favorite. There's no doubt about that. I will say, can we take the wide shot of Dr. Martin? I noticed that Lauren, he's a retired fire chief, in the live chat. He says there's something strange about your setup in the back. He says he's not used to seeing exercise equipment without clothing draped all over it. So Lauren, for the first time, is seeing what exercise equipment looks like. Yeah, nice job. Are you at the hospital today again?
I will be at the hospital later. I'm at the clinic today.
Okay, brother. Thanks for doing this, and have a great weekend. Stay safe out there, yeah?
Thank you very much, Ryan. Good to see you.
Yeah, from the gateway to the Rockies, stunning Hinton, Alberta. That's Dr. Bradley Martin. You can follow him on Twitter at DocMartin1987. And is he still there? Doc, I did want to say one final thing. Last time you were on the show, I don't remember my exact words, but I accused your Twitter account of being a little bit boring.
It still is.
Yeah. Okay. I just wanted to check in to see if you had resolved to make it a little more inflammatory or not. But you do identify yourself as a healthcare professional on there.
I can't be too inflammatory. I've got another one that is, and it's not the one that you think it is. But
yeah, you won't tell us about your burner. Hey, you don't tell people. What's the point of a burner account if people don't know what my burner account is, right? No, I don't have one.
Well, there you go.
I don't have one, but I should. Thanks, buddy.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you got it. Doc Martin 1987 is where you can follow him on Twitter. We're going to talk to 3 Alberta mayors coming up in 90 seconds. Before we do, I want to remind you that if you're going to be looking, you and your family, for a new vehicle this weekend, there could be a number of different reasons. Perhaps you got rear-ended like we did yesterday. Bum, 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 bum.
Okay, so I come into work today and I saw like a printout and I'm like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, rear-ended yesterday. Blew up the whole back of it. Anyway, I digress. Or maybe you're looking to upsize something to pull a trailer. Maybe you're looking to downsize so your gas bill at the pump isn't $230 every 10 days or so. Whatever your situation, the teams at Sherwood and St. Albert Dodge have a solution for you. They've been finding the perfect fit for their return customers for years. And of course, the cool part about this is it's the same ownership group, so they can share inventories. You can explore all their vehicles from the Ram, Jeep, Dodge, and Chrysler lineup today online at stalbertdodge.com, sherwooddodge.com, or you can just go see them in person. Let them know that Real Talk sent you. And don't forget, a big part of doing business with them is their sales and service side. You can trust this team. That goes a long way when it comes to vehicle sales. It's why we're proud to partner with them. Same deal with Park Power. I talk to you all the time about how this is a family-owned business. We love that. How many utility companies are family-owned? One? They're in the business of electricity, natural gas, and internet, but they're also in the business of giving back to community. 10% of their profits on electricity, they plug those back into nonprofits where they live and work. If you go to parkpower.ca, when you sign up there, part of the process of signing up is you get to choose where your contribution is going to which charity. What? How cool is that? Make sure you use the promo code 2022-RealTalk when you take your business to Park Power. If you do that, they'll knock $70 off your very first bill. And our friends at Kubi Energy want to remind you that they are always looking for certified installers as well as those that want to get there. That means that you may not have your ticket as an electrician yet. Maybe you're an apprentice, or maybe you're just thinking about switching jobs. They want to meet you where you're at. As long as you're a hard worker, as long as you're committed to excellence, they can work with that. Kubi Energy operates across Western Canada, based out of Kamloops and Edmonton. You can learn about career opportunities, plus get a free quote for solar. There's a $40,000 interest-free loan available right now from the feds, by the way, everybody. $40,000 interest-free. All of the details at kubienergy.ca. Well, I love these roundtables. We bring them to you every month or so, every couple of months. We want to check in to communities around our neck of the woods, but not necessarily always the two biggest ones, because there's a lot happening. And there are hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of folks on the prairies, in particular Alberta, living in Alberta municipalities that deserve to have their community's issues discussed and addressed on a show like this. And that's why we're excited to present this traditional Friday Real Talk Roundtable, celebrating and focusing on Alberta municipalities of small and medium sizes. Her Worship Cathy Heron is the president of Alberta Municipalities. She's the mayor of the city of St. Albert. She served on that council since 2009, and she was elected president of Alberta Municipalities back in November of 2021. She prides herself on a collaborative approach to leading and governing. That's her thing. Tyler Gandam is vice president for cities under $500,000. He's the Wetaskiwin city councilor since 2013, the mayor of the city of Wetaskiwin now, and of course a funeral director by trade, also a captain with the local fire department. That's the thing in communities like this. You'll find people wearing a whole bunch of different hats, and I suppose helmets too. Captain and Mayor Gandam, prior to becoming Alberta Municipalities VP, he served as a director. So he's been involved in the community and in this group for a long time. And Angela Duncan joining us as the mayor of the village of Alberta Beach. It's located on the southeast shore of beautiful Lac St. Anne, about maybe a half hour west of Edmonton. She's Alberta Municipalities Director for Villages West, and she was on this show, and she was briefly serving as Alberta Municipalities interim president back in fall 2021. So we got 3 mayors hanging out with us for the next half hour, so looking forward to this conversation. It's great to see you all. A good morning to you, President and Mayor Heron. We get the double barrel thumbs up from you, so why don't I start with you first? What's shaking in the city of St. Albert these days? I mean, I've got a whole list of things we want to talk about. We're going to focus on the so-called social issues today, but what's one of the things at the top of your list in St. Albert, just north of Edmonton?
homelessness. If you want to talk social issues, that's where we're going to start. But I mean, there's lots going on. I'm sitting outside and it's a gorgeous day right now. So that's the number for you. We love our trees here, but we should get into the topics. And yeah, the first one I think we would like to talk about is definitely homelessness. And by the way, Ryan, I was looking forward to this all morning. I always love being on. So thank you for the time. I think the three of us were chosen to have a conversation with you today because, like, we talked about having some of the big city councilors join us because they have so many social issues, but we believe it's super important to talk about how the system is broken in the fact that St. Albert, Wetaskiwin, Alberta Beach, for example, end up sending their social issues into the big cities.
Hey, I just want to remind all the guests that all of your mics are hot right now, so we can hear everything. Just a reminder, all of the mics are hot right now. Sorry to interrupt you, Mayor Heron.
That's okay. That's Tyler clearing his throat. Yeah, I think it was in the news, not that long ago in May when Minister Chandros came down on Edmonton and asked for a safety plan to deal with the crime in their downtown. And we were all together. We were doing some board meetings and the two councillors from Calgary were like, well, why are they not coming down on Calgary? We have just the same number of issues and problems. And Tyler can speak to the crime in Wetaskiwin and the homelessness in Wetaskiwin. So this is not a big city problem. These are issues that are across Alberta. And the system definitely is broken.
Mayor Gandam, one of the things that I've always, and I've said this to you before, one of the things I've always appreciated when you've been on this show and when you and I have spoken on a previous show as well, is you've never bullshitted us about the state of affairs in Wetaskiwin. You've never, like a lot of people, a lot of politicians, and I understand why, they're doing double duty as sort of like the director of tourism as well, right? And so they're going to say like everything's fantastic in our city and there's no problem with the opioid crisis and we're working to end homelessness and it's not really a problem and the crime is under control. And you've gone on the record on this show saying crime in our community per capita is the worst in the province. I mean, you've not shied away from talking about controversial approaches that have been taken. I mean, people have tried to put up, you know what I'm talking about here. I think of baby Jesus being born in the manger. That was kind of the idea of there was like these outdoor shelters for the homeless and people were saying, what is this, like the Old Testament? You remember these conversations we've had, but you've tried a bunch of different things. The community's tried to find solutions, but you've never, not even once, pretended like it's not a hell of a challenge.
It's a huge challenge. And this goes back to, I've been in the community for 30 years. And to me, coming from Vancouver to Wetaskiwin and seeing public intoxication or groups gathered drinking middle of the afternoon was pretty common in a big city. And growing up being a kid in Wetaskiwin, it was common here as well. So I just thought that was something that happened everywhere. And it wasn't until I was older that I started to realize that, no, we do have bigger social issues in Wetaskiwin. And then it wasn't until I was elected to council and then my first term as mayor, where I started actively trying to find the solutions to go along with it. And that's just been my push now for just about the last 5 years, is changing what it looks like. Because for the majority of those years of me being captain, Wetaskiwin's been Alberta's most dangerous city. And you can talk to the majority of the residents that live here and would, unless the statistics said that, would have no idea that we live in Alberta's most dangerous city or that we're top 5 in Canada. Nobody here would ever suggest or feel that they weren't unsafe here that often to have that kind of title. So while still statistics are important, it's certainly not what it paints the picture of what Wetaskiwin is, because we've got amazing people here. We're top 5 in Alberta for donations per capita. And we live in one of the lowest socioeconomic communities in Alberta, but we can be top 5 in that. So the people here is what makes the community great and why I'm here and why I'm continuing to do the work that I'm doing. But we definitely have our issues, social and otherwise, and we need to find the solutions to it. And homelessness isn't a big city problem. We would rival any big city in North America per capita for the number of homeless population that we have here in our city of 13, just under 13,000 people.
Okay, well, I want to get into that and maybe some of the root causes, and because I think and someone might say, well, isn't it obvious? But I don't think it is obvious. I don't think that we have these conversations, informed conversations about what eradicating or eliminating homelessness, let alone, I mean, maybe let's just start with addressing it, what that actually looks like effectively. I will say I'm grateful that we're having this conversation, Mayor Duncan, because people might take a look at your community. I mean, it's got beach in the name, for Pete's sake. People are going to think it's like a haven. Like whatever, the worst thing that happens at Alberta Beach is somebody leaves their sandwich wrapper in the sand and we got to go pick it up and then we get back to perfection, right? But I suspect you might tell me that that's not exactly the case. Does your village encounter some of the same challenges, just on a smaller scale, that some of the big metropolitan areas do?
We absolutely do. Our challenges are no different than we see in the larger centers. The key difference is that we don't have a lot of attention paid to us, so we don't talk about it very much. And we don't have the resources or the capacity to handle issues in our own communities. So what happens is that when we have a problem with homelessness or affordable housing or other social issues, we usually rely on the large centers to take care of them for us. So our problems really just get shipped into Edmonton, Calgary, and our surrounding communities because we just don't have access to supports to deal with them at home. And that doesn't help the problem, because when we take our residents and people that are struggling in our own communities and we ship them off, we're taking them away from the support networks and the sense of community that they do have access to. We're taking them away from family and friends and moving them into larger centers so that they have access to affordable housing or access to shelters or social supports, mental health supports, whatever it is that they need. And often we even see that we rely on the RCMP or ambulance to bring people into larger centers because we also lack access to public transportation.
So where do we start? We're going to have a conversation. I know that, obviously a group like Alberta Municipalities is important because it gets people talking and it kind of gets people on the same page. It reiterates the idea that everyone's working toward the same goal. Cathy, you steer it as president. So when you start talking about effectively addressing homelessness, I know that we're going to talk about necessary big expenditures, right? We're going to need to talk about cooperation from different levels of government. It requires big cash infusions, but let's get specific. What works and what are you really hoping to see? What are you lobbying for? What does Alberta Municipalities want to see?
Well, it's always that collaborative approach with the provincial government for the most part. A lot of these issues on housing and some of the core things that lead to homelessness are mental health and addictions, and those are definitely a provincial jurisdiction, and we need to work with the province, and sometimes we don't feel we get the support. There is no Ministry of Housing. That's one of the problems right there. That I don't have a specific minister I can go to. I can go to Minister of Infrastructure and I can get capital funding, but then what ministry do I go to operate a shelter or transitional home type? So we don't have provincial help to just wrap around. We need wraparound services, and that's talked about a lot, because you don't just put a roof over someone's head. You need to give them whatever supports they need to get off whatever they're on. We need to give them supports in mental health, and that's of course the issue that's escalated homelessness in Alberta in the last 2 years is mental health for sure. And so the municipalities, even though it's not our job, we're and I will not use the D word, the downloading word, because we're here to be partners. Like St. Albert right now is giving up a $3 million piece of land to build affordable housing in our downtown. We gladly do that. These are our residents. We care for them, and we want our communities to thrive. And thriving communities leads to good economic prosperity. So it's really honestly about the solutions are there. Everyone understands them. We just need to work together to fund those solutions.
Let me ask the three of you about this. And Mayor Duncan, this one kind of lands in your lap because we're talking about your community. And I want to credit Real Talker Emma, who's put this story on my radar. She's reminding me this horrific story of these two murders in Edmonton's Chinatown district. You remember this? This guy, Justin Bone, who's now facing charges after being dropped off in the city unsupervised by RCMP. It's actually a unbelievable story. I'm citing the reporting by Wallace Snowden, who does a great job with CBC News. But the controversy here is that essentially this person was picked up by RCMP in Alberta Beach, right, in your community where he'd been staying with a family friend. And RCMP and allegedly Edmonton police essentially ignored warnings about the danger that this man could pose to public safety. A man commenting on this close to the accused said this is like a starlight ride in reverse. I think everybody's familiar with the horrific, can I call it a tradition, of these starlight tours. We hear about them in Alberta. Saskatchewan in particular seems to have a disproportionate number of them where police will pick up people, typically Indigenous people, drive them way outside the city and drop them off in the middle of the night, oftentimes without a winter coat. It's minus 30. I mean, it's horrific, right? This described as a starlight ride in reverse. This person says you drop them off in the middle of the city. You made sure that this guy was a city of Edmonton problem. Now, I obviously understand the sense that goes into bringing somebody to a major urban center where there are resources like housing, detox, supervised consumption, counseling, like all of the things. I get it. But at the same time, this was an example of that sort of practice really blowing up in your face. So as we try to come up with intuitive, effective, evidence-based solutions that work, how do we reconcile all of this? How do we equip the small communities to have the resources they need? And how do we ensure that the big urban centers are prepared to handle the influx? Like Mayor Gandam, for example, Wetaskiwin probably experiences this to a smaller degree, right? There's smaller communities around you, and then Wetaskiwin becomes the hub as well. We see it happening all across the province. So Mayor Duncan, why don't I go to you first? How do we figure out the best way to do this?
I had a feeling this was going to come up today, Ryan. The situation with Justin Bone, who was sent into Edmonton, was unfortunate, and there's a lot of different things that I think went into it. And I certainly can't comment on why the RCMP made the decisions that they did and whether or not they were the appropriate decisions. I just don't have that information. But I think what this situation really highlights is the complete lack of access to supports and services that we have in rural Alberta. Had there been access to shelters and housing that this man could have gone to, we might not have to have sent him into Edmonton the way that happened. And like I said, whether or not that was the right call, I'm just not able to comment. I think a lot of it comes to funding of social supports in rural Alberta. We don't have a lot of funding. Most of our funding does come through the FCSS program, the Family and Community Support Services. And I'll tell you, for a community of my size, I partner with 3 other summer villages. And between the 4 of us, we have about $40,000 that we have for preventative programming. So even if we wanted to have the supports in our community, and often we do, we just don't have the money to do it.
Yeah. Mayor Gandam, and I'm right about that? I don't want to make assumptions, but does Wetaskiwin see a similar practice to it, maybe just to a bit of a smaller degree?
I don't know that people are being dropped off in the city from outside communities, but we become the hub. We've got the amenities in Wetaskiwin that Muskogee might not. So Tim Hortons, McDonald's, Walmart, liquor stores. And that just, even when Samson set up a MATS program in the wintertime, the availability for an emergency shelter was there in Muskogee, but it wasn't being used because they don't have the amenities that Wetaskiwin has. So it then becomes the hub for people experiencing homelessness or just people who feel safe in their own community. We've noticed or have realized over the last few years that the homeless community really support and protect one another. And so if Wetaskiwin happens to be where the majority of the people experiencing homelessness are, then they come as well. And it becomes a regional issue. One of the things that I hear way too often is that it's not our problem because they're not from here. Well, if you're experiencing homelessness in Wetaskiwin, you are essentially an issue that I have to deal with. I can't just put somebody on a bus or numerous people on a bus and ship them out of the community. And it's not serving any purpose. It's not addressing the social needs that happen to be there. What we need to have is the social needs and the assistance available for where a person is looking for it. And it's going to happen over and over and over again. but we still need to be ready to offer that assistance.
Yeah.
And it can be as simple as just applying for assistance or getting an ID card or a health card or helping with undiagnosed or untreated medical needs. All of these issues that we're having with the population, our vulnerable population, still need those supports in place. And it doesn't matter where I think they should be or where the general public thinks they should be. At what point do we tell somebody that they can't be somewhere? If somebody told me I couldn't go into St. Albert for whatever reason, that's not fair. So how or why should I be able to tell somebody that they can't come into my community because they don't fit what my community or any community feels they want being outside of the stores or wherever?
Just not an option, right?
Yeah.
It reminds me of the Ralph Klein solution that he proposed back in the day, is just give everybody a one-way bus ticket to BC. And we found like a lot of citizens in Alberta were like, that's a great idea. Not really how it works. We can't talk about homelessness without talking about affordable housing. And these are some striking numbers. I think that it's important to provide some perspective here for people that are hearing this. So, when you talk about a shortage of affordable housing in our home province of Alberta, and I would imagine this is the case across the country, but experts are describing it as a chronic shortage. And what that means is that almost 165,000, more than 164,000 households in Alberta, 164,000 households, not people, households, are in core housing need. Well, what does that mean? It means that the home does not meet one or more standards for housing adequacy, right? So it requires repairs, or it's too crowded, or affordability is an issue. In other words, get this, more than 500,000, let's call it 500,000 households in Alberta pay more than 30% of their households before tax income on housing. That's a problem. And more than 24,000 households are on provincial affordable housing wait lists. 24,000. I was trying to, in my mind, paint a picture that I can, terms I can understand. Think of actual paper in your hand. How many pieces of paper a list of 24,000 households would be. Right? It would be way thicker than a phone book. And these are people, a lot of times children, elderly folks, people on fixed income with no options. So I hope that this provides a perspective of how significant or how serious this issue is. It's not a few hundred people here or there. And even if it was, they're still human beings, right? So Mayor Heron, where does this movement start? Obviously, a collaborative approach is important, but also, you're looking out for St. Albert. That's your number one job. That's what you were elected to do. So where does it start?
I think it's important to understand how linked all these topics we're going to talk about today, crime and addictions and housing, are. There's Homeward Trust has done a study that said that for every dollar invested into affordable housing, we will save $4 in the justice and health system. But, and quite honestly, Ryan, it's much sexier to stand beside a couple of our CMP officers and announce we're going to give some cops to Wetaskiwin than it is to invest in a counselor. But if you had that counselor in front of somebody, you might not get to the crime. So it's a political game, and all that we continue to ask for is that FCSS program that Angela talked about earlier is all about preventative programming. It hasn't had an increase in the funding in 5 years. And obviously our population has grown and the social issues have grown. Yeah, and so St. Albert continues to over-subsidize it. I'm sure Wetaskiwin and Alberta Beach are as well. So it's prevention. It's get people healthy. And we did talk, it's quite often Indigenous, and that is generational. And so some of the reconciliation efforts are going to be helping. I'm sure Angela's going to talk to you about the Pope coming to Alberta Beach in a minute. And he's also actually going down to Tyler's neck of the woods. So these are all very linked. In St. Albert, I desperately want to build a youth transitional home. We did the full study. I don't know if you've ever met Dean Kripperwhite. He's the head of the Mustard Seed. He chaired it for me. All I want to do is put up 10 beds and take care of my youth, because what happens if they get into Edmonton and get sucked into a lifestyle that they're not quite accustomed to in the big city? There's gangs, there's more access to drugs, etc. They end up chronically homeless.
Happens fast.
Let's take care of them when they're young.
Yeah. Angela, Mayor Duncan, I'm asking that. Whatever. No, I feel like I'm asking in a snide way. I'm wondering if the two mayors, if Gandam and Duncan, if you're getting new highways now that the Pope's coming down. But silver linings, I guess. No, but seriously, the significance of that visit in the context of reconciliation. How important is it to your community, or is it important? I mean,
absolutely, it's important to our community. Reconciliation has long been on everybody's radar.
Oh, to be clear, let me not to interrupt you. I don't mean is reconciliation important. I mean how important is the Pope's visit? Obviously, reconciliation is important. Yeah. Oh, did she freeze? I think she did her connection freeze. Yeah, I thought she was just giving me the look. Okay, I was like, oh boy, she is just still there. She is, Mayor. You froze up for a second there. My apologies. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I lost you entirely.
No,
there.
It's okay. That's something really funny just happened. I asked you. I could have done the question better, and I was asking you how important the Pope's visit was in the context of reconciliation. I wanted to clarify that I acknowledge reconciliation's very important, but how important or how significant is the Pope's visit specifically?
It is very, very significant, not just in our region, which it is. We do share our lake with the Alexis Nakota Sioux Nation. They actually call it Wakamne, which means God's Lake. This has been a traditional gathering ground for Indigenous peoples since time immemorial. So the Pope coming to the pilgrimage is a huge step towards reconciliation. It's welcomed by our community, and I know it's welcomed by the larger Indigenous and Catholic community as well. It's very important.
Mayor Gandam, you also will see, at least relatively close to Wetaskiwin, that papal visit. How's the community preparing for it, and where's your head at, and what are you hearing from Indigenous leaders that I'm sure you correspond with on at least a semi-regular basis?
Yeah, so it's really important for us to support our community to the south with Maskwacis, and that's something that we've been focusing on for a number of years. And the papal visit is just another way for us to be able to support our neighbors in Maskwacis. I actually had breakfast with Chief Urbanskin this morning and had a really good opportunity to talk to him about the importance of it is in their community. And he said, in the community, it's probably half and half in support and maybe some reluctance and questioning behind it.
Yeah.
The roads being built or fixed in Maskwacis was part of the province's plan or part of the province's work with reconciliation as well, to be partners and stewards within the community of Maskwacis to make sure, and in Alberta Beach, to make sure that something that they've been working on and asking for decades that is finally happening goes as well as it can. I know that Chief Willie Littlechild was doing his visit with the Pope and has been asking for 20 years to come and visit and see the residential school sites and to pray with the people and to pray with the Indigenous that had lived through that. And Chief Urbanskin is one of those individuals who attended residential schools, and his story is absolutely amazing and heartbreaking. But I think it's really important, not only for the community in Maskwacis, but for any community in Alberta to be able to support the First Nations and the travesties and the hardships that they're going to continue to work through. Mayor Heron talked about the intergenerational trauma that is definitely tied to why we're so deep in the social issues that we have in each of our communities, that if we're not addressing those things and we're not offering support, then we're never going to make any change. And reconciliation is just one small part of that. And I'm happy and honored to be the mayor of the city who's working on building relationships and bridges with our neighboring communities.
Yeah. We talked to Connie Walker, journalist and podcaster, just a few days ago. She did that Gimlet Media Spotify podcast called Stolen, Surviving St. Michael's, about the St. Michael's Indian Residential School in Saskatchewan. And just unbelievable. People have to listen to that interview, and they have to listen to her podcast. I just implore people to do it. It's remarkable. But, Mayors, one of the things that you consider, I know this isn't lost on you, is that a lot of this work that you're doing, and I know that you're the faces of this, but there's a lot of people working with you as well. We want to acknowledge them. A lot of this is not like, it's not going to pay off, so to speak, or deliver immediate returns next week or next month. A lot of this has to be literally in 50 or 100 years If we want to be able to look back, if we want our great grandchildren to be able to look back and be proud of how we manage some of these challenges, some of these travesties, like you said, Mayor Gandam, it has to start now, right? I mean, Mayor Duncan, you must have to make a lot of noise out of. I mean, there's like just such a wonderful element of living in a village or a hamlet. I mean, you don't get a lot of the big city noise. You don't get. I mean, it's just some fabulous parts of angles of living in a community that size. But do you also have to kind of like speak up and have your voice be heard if we're talking about things like affordable housing? Like does Alberta Beach factor into the mix where you say, hey, like we need resources here too. We need affordable housing in Alberta Beach. And then how do you make that argument? How does that work for someone in a relatively smaller community like yourself?
Well, it is challenging. If we want to make progress, we definitely need to make a lot of noise. In a lot of our communities, smaller communities, mine in particular, but in many others, we have single family dwellings and that's it. So some of the things that we're doing is we're looking at our land use bylaw, making sure that it allows for more housing options in different areas of the community. We've rezoned our main street to allow commercial on the bottom and residential on the top to try and encourage more housing downtown that's more apartment style. We've allowed for secondary suites on our residential areas. So we're doing what we can to encourage more affordable housing options. But for us, a lot of it comes down to policy and not government funding. And I'll reiterate that if somebody in my community doesn't have access to affordable housing or is having a housing situation, often they do end up into the larger centers where there is affordable housing, and that takes them away from the community support network, the family, the friends that they have out here, so that they can go into Edmonton so that they can afford to live. So it's important that rural communities are talking about it, that we're looking at what we can do through policy and procedure, but also that the province is looking at us and helping us find other solutions.
Mayors, we talk a lot about the opioid crisis. Still, it's not enough. I think it's fair to say, if we look at the numbers of Canadians, Albertans, that are dying on a daily basis, it's completely unacceptable. It's heartbreaking. After I talk to you, I'm going to read an email here from a mom named Angie who wrote in to talk about her son. It's powerful stuff. And of course, this all factors in, right? I mean, drug use is sort of a part of the consideration that needs to be had. It needs to be part of the conversation around the so-called social issues. So, Mayor Heron, we know that there's evidence-based approaches to handling the opioid crisis, to trying to save people's lives. This provincial government, I don't know how much you want to get into it, feel free. I'll be happy to get into it, has denied and ignored and created policy in the face of evidence. I think this premier's ideological bend, his brother's career, how his brother makes his money, is in detox, and that's where this government is really doubling down. There's nothing wrong with detox as one tool in the toolbox, but this government has pulled funding and closed down supervised consumption sites that have proven to have saved thousands of lives in Canada over the years. So what works with regards to the opioid crisis? What are your three communities doing? What's not being done that needs to be done? What do Albertans need to be talking about in the context of drug poisonings and the opioid crisis? Mayor Heron.
Yeah, sure. It's important to start off with the opioid crisis is affecting everyone. It's every socioeconomic level, every gender. It's sad. And, in the past, quite often there's a stigma related to drug use, et cetera, but we need to get past that stigma. It's now called drug poisoning, not drug overdoses. It definitely is a poison. And it's St. Albert, generally a fairly wealthy community. It's everywhere in St. Albert. My kids are 23 and 21, and their friends, they've lost friends. And it's the kids that I saw growing up, and it's heartbreaking. And you're absolutely right. It's the supervised consumption sites that are not sexy. They're not politically easy to put in. They do attract some, surrounding neighbors and their objections. But leadership has to be strong, and they really have to stick with what works. And those are the kind of things. And then, of course, I'm going to get right back to prevention. It's always about prevention and providing those supports before the problem even gets in place.
And I was listening a bit before with your previous guest, the doctor, and it's leading to an outright crisis in the health system, especially around EMS. Tyler is a first responder, a medical first responder, and he can probably talk to you about arriving on scene to some of these overdoses. And it's heartbreaking, and it's wrecking the mental health of our first responders. You know, they're arriving in the emergency rooms. The doctors in the emergency rooms are stressed out. So it's such a systemic issue, and the answers are in front of us, and the government has to step up. And this is one area that I would say they have definitely failed.
Mayor Gandam?
Safe consumption sites or supervised consumption sites in conjunction with preventative measures, in conjunction with working with the youth, so that you give somebody the opportunity from the very beginning to understand the risks and what happens not addressing or not dealing with mental health and how that could lead to addictions. It's scary. I can't tell you the number of times. I've over 20 years experience with our fire service, and for probably 17 or 18 of those years, 17 probably, where I wasn't dealing with drug poisonings or drug overdoses. And now I can't tell you how many times I've personally administered Narcan or naloxone, or have been in the rotation of CPR. One of the things they don't teach you when you're doing CPR is what to do when somebody opens their eyes and looks at you, because you're not trained or prepared for that. It's an amazing feeling, but you have no idea what is going on. I've responded to calls everywhere. It doesn't matter whether it's Wetaskiwin's wealthier neighborhoods or the lower income neighborhoods. I've responded to drug poisonings in all of those houses. So Mayor Heron's right. It's absolutely everywhere. I was talking to Mayor Acker from Spruce Grove the other day, who is now experiencing higher numbers of people experiencing homelessness as well, which you would never think about in communities like St. Albert or Spruce Grove. It caught me off guard when he asked me if I would come and speak to their council about the struggles that they're going through with that as well. And it happens from something as simple as me slipping and falling and hurting my back, getting put on painkillers, and then becoming addicted to it. And then from then on out, without the supports in place, how do I get through that? And how do I not ending up homeless or with a drug addiction or losing my jobs and not being able to provide for my families? It's scary, it's real. And if we're not addressing it early, it's just gonna multiply. Both Edmonton and Calgary, and probably the majority of the major centers in Alberta, have seen a double in numbers of people experiencing homelessness. And that's just through COVID. So
double?
Double. Absolutely double.
That's the lead. That's the lead. We buried the lead today. That's on me. Yeah. Doubled. Jeez.
And so we were overtaxed before in terms of trying to find solutions for affordable housing or mental health and addiction supports. Now we're twice what we were before, and we were way behind when this started pre-pandemic. So I don't know what the answer is. I don't know how to get through it. But if we don't start being more aggressive in how we're handling it and how we're going to tackle the crisis that we're in, we're going to be so far behind in another year, another 5 years, and then 10 years from now.
Oh, man.
It's scary.
You know, one of the things I can't stand oftentimes, like when dialogue or discourse really gets like into the gutter and into the ditch, and it's not happening right now, by the way, to be clear, but people's like, it's not my problem, it's not our fault, it's their fault, and everybody starts pointing pictures like you're the one, that we're not the ones, right? But it is also important to point out where jurisdiction lies and who's responsible, like technically, actually responsible. And so provinces may receive health transfers from the feds, for example, but provinces are responsible for health care. Now, there's been some dust up. Real Talkers will remember with changes to the Municipal Governance Act. I believe that we talked to this panel about that several panels ago. Extremely controversial. As a matter of fact, because it gets in the weeds and it's technical and it's contract and like the majority of the pop, it just goes over their heads. They don't care, really. Their eyes gloss over when we start talking about changes to the MGA, but it was ridiculous because You've got, for example, a premier, Jason Kenney, who demands that Ottawa stay out of their business, but then meddled into the business of all the municipalities when it came to things like mask mandates and the like. So it's been messy with regards to jurisdictional matters over the past couple of years, and as a matter of fact, quite a bit longer than that. Now, the reason for this preamble is for me to point out that health is a provincial responsibility. It is a provincial jurisdiction, full stop. But right now, my impression is that municipalities are addressing this problem because the provincial solutions don't seem to be working. Mayor Duncan, does that apply as well in Alberta Beach? I mean, I suspect you're going to tell us you're not immune to seeing the impact of this drug poisoning crisis just because your community is quaint and a little bit smaller than the big centers. What do you see?
I would love to tell you that I'm immune to it, but no, unfortunately, it's as much a problem in rural Alberta and small town Alberta as it is in the major centers.
Yeah.
Again, with the key difference being that we have no access to resources out here. I personally have had, since the COVID-19 pandemic began, 3 family members die of drug poisoning. So it is affecting absolutely everybody. Sorry, that's a tough one to talk about. Unfortunately, it's another problem that we do tend to ship into the cities. So you talk about it being not my problem. Well, that's our solution is to send them places that there are some sort of supports. And a lot of it does start with lack of mental health supports. We've recently been discussing in my community how we can expand mental health supports. And again, it comes back to a lack of funding. We looked at our options through FCSS. And if we were to move our funding in FCSS to help provide more mental health supports, well, do we cut family supports? Do we cut supports to seniors? Where do we cut so that we can focus on mental health supports? There's just not funding available to deal with that. And that ties into the larger issue of funding for all medical in rural Alberta. You know, we don't have access to healthcare. We don't have access to doctors. We're struggling to recruit. So it's the more we talk, the bigger the situation gets, and it's all very intertwined.
I want to ask the three of you about, with regards to racism, hate crimes, and victims of crime, and we'll wrap our conversation here. I really appreciate your time. We got to you a few minutes late because the Dr. Brad Martin thing was just, I mean, that guy's just speaking his truth. And we want to certainly have a show where the reputation gets around, where we'll dedicate a little bit more time to something that demands that time. But I suspect you all have meetings coming up. In 2020, Canadian police across the country reported 2,700, specifically 2,669 criminal incidents motivated by hate. That was the largest number recorded since data became available in 2009. So it could be the largest numbers from way before 2009, but they only started compiling the data in that year. In 2019, there were just under 1,600 police-reported crimes motivated by hatred of a race or an ethnicity. That was up by 80% over the year prior. Now, it's safe to say that these recent increases in racism and hate-motivated crimes have adversely affected Albertans' public safety and well-being. We've heard that from community members here, from Real Talkers, from hijabi women that have written in, to Indigenous people that have written in, to members of the LGBTQ2S+ community that have written in to talk about being targeted. So the provincial government does have, or is working on, let me say, an anti-racism action plan. Using that as context, how are the three of you wrapping your minds around these statistics? What are you seeing in your communities, and what needs to be done about it? Mayor Heron, we'll start with you.
Sure. You know, hate crime is generally a federal jurisdiction, the criminal code, but there's a thin line that some people don't cross when it becomes criminal. You know, the screaming and the yelling and the swearing, and it is a sad state that our society is in right now, that municipalities are bringing in hate bylaws. You know, it's honestly, Edmonton has one, and some of the bigger centers do, and St. Albert, you know, I'm getting pressure to do it here. How do you legislate behavior? And it's a very sad look at society today, and there is politicians out there that are enabling it, and that's what's sad. And we could talk about what's going on south of the border, but it's happening in our own communities. There's current sitting MLAs that perpetuate that hate,
and that is a problem.
Mayor, are you talking about somebody in particular?
I am, and you know me, Ryan, I can't use names because I have to work with these people. I will never name call, but
well, how about you shoot me a text when I'm talking to Mayor Gandam, and then I'll read the name. How about that?
Okay, sure. There's a few MLAs that I would like to put my hands around their neck and wring them, to tell you the honest truth.
Yeah.
And Angela knows exactly who I'm talking about. But, we have a surplus in this province right now. And now is the time to have some targeted investment on where that money goes. And to have a conversation about bringing back a Ralph Bucks type, give back to Albertans is ridiculous. And when you've got three mayors here that are screaming, Angela, if she could double her FCSS money, that would be $40,000. She would kiss the premier. Like these are small investments that we're asking for to have. Well, she might not kiss them. So I think, the three of us, my entire board, are going to be very, very targeted in the UCP leadership campaign, making sure these issues are front and center and making sure that they are understood and we will present the solutions to all of these leaders. And then, of course, we're having a provincial election in May, and we'll be doing the exact same thing because of the solutions are there. They just need to be funded. And it's as simple as that. Mayor, you have a premier who screams at municipalities for raising taxes, but we're raising taxes to cover off what the province is not doing. Healthcare, ambulance, for an example, my fire department is all advanced or primary care paramedics. Every fire truck, we've spent a fortune making sure they have advanced life support on them. And they're the ones getting to the overdoses and drug poisonings first, because the ambulances aren't coming. So, and that's my bill. That's not the province's. I'm taxing my St. Albert residents. So we have to raise taxes because that's our only revenue source. And the collaboration has been lacking.
Yeah, I mean, it's like the province is the deadbeat dad that claims that it has balanced its household budget by stopping child support payments.
I have said they've balanced it on the backs of municipalities.
Yeah. So, congratulations, I guess. But you're just screwing over the municipalities who have no choice. But you guys can't. I don't know if most people know this or not, but municipalities cannot run deficit budgets. It's not an option. You can't run a $400,000 deficit in Wetaskiwin. You can't run a $150,000 deficit in Alberta Beach. Right? It's not an option. Mayor Gandam, when you talk about your community, you're probably, you get off of this interview, you're like, why did he have to keep returning to this? But we talk, and it's not funny. I'm not making light of it, but you say we've got some of the, the heaviest crime stats in the country in Wetaskiwin in the context of hate crimes fueled by racism, et cetera. Do you see that? Is that part of the conversation? Absolutely it is. And the sad part is that by definition, it's not always a crime. Prejudices and stereotypes for people in my community, regardless of where they come from, the color of their skin, where they worship or if they worship, prejudices and stereotypes are rampant, and I throughout the province, but definitely in Wetaskiwin. And it's a matter of, I hope, leading by example. And that's something that I've put a lot of time and effort into, is to making sure that. And it's not just with Indigenous or First Nations people or with the community of Muskwachees. It's with everybody, that if leadership can work with leadership, then why can't the communities work together? And I get it. If you're talking about generation or intergenerational trauma, we're also talking about generations of hate or not understanding another culture. And it's extremely frustrating. And I don't know how we're going to get past that, and it's not going to happen in my term as mayor, let alone in my lifetime. But are you picking up on, are you perceiving progress? Do you see small? Yeah. You do? I do, but I'm also putting in a great deal of effort for it as well. So I can see the change. I can see the dynamic shift. I can feel it. I don't know if my community as a whole feels or sees the same thing. I think some do, but we had, so getting back to the crime side of it, we had a murder a week ago. Young First Nations boy, I think he was 19 or 20 years old. I have no idea
what the circumstances were, what led to it, but automatically it was deemed a race crime, or it was racially driven. Now, I have no evidence to support that whatsoever.
You're saying that's from police? That's what police are saying?
No, that's what the community's saying.
I see. Okay.
So I don't have any evidence to back that up whatsoever. And the worst thing you can do is speculate or assume what had happened or why it had happened. But if that's the initial thought from either community members in Wetaskiwin or community members from Maskwacis, then that tells me right there that there is a great deal of work left to be done if your first assumption of somebody who was murdered is that it was racially driven. And it doesn't matter whether that happens in Wetaskiwin or Edmonton or Calgary or wherever it happens. It's heartbreaking. And I don't know what a community can do to build that relationship or build that trust.
Is there a, this is, I guess I'm asking you for some real talk. Is there like a palpable tension between Maskwacis and Wetaskiwin? Like I'm not from that. I've never lived in that area. I've lived near that area. I don't want to assume anything, but is there a real energy, a negative energy, or how would you describe it?
And for me, I don't think it's as bad as it was.
Okay.
It has definitely been extremely tense. I don't think it's as tense now, but the fact that there is some kind of tension, regardless of how many people are feeling it, they're feeling it. And that can't be how two communities work together. The reason that Wetaskiwin has the amenities that they have is because Maskwacis has a population of close to 20,000 people right now. And we have an amazing hospital. We've got just overall the shopping that we can have in Wetaskiwin, the schools that we have, all of the amenities that we have is because of a shadow population in and around Wetaskiwin. So the county of Wetaskiwin has a similar population to Wetaskiwin. That certainly helps. But when Maskwacis doesn't have the shopping opportunities or the hospital or the doctors that Wetaskiwin has, that's the reason that we have what we have. And neither community is moving. Neither community is going anywhere. And if we don't learn to live together and take advantage of some of the things that we have in our region because of our close proximity, we're missing out on a great deal of opportunity. And that's something that I'll keep pushing. I've got at least 3 years left of my term as mayor, and I'll keep pushing for that. And I go back to, I'm not specifically saying that the relationship or the partnering has to happen with First Nations or Indigenous. I've got a large Filipino population here. When I moved here 30 years ago, there wasn't very many East Indian families here. My dad is full East Indian. I'm only half. But I've grown up dealing with the racist and racial jokes. And, when I get out of high school, am I going to be driving the cab or am I going to be working at the 7-Eleven? Which at the time was funny and I could brush it off. But there are probably a lot of people who laugh on the surface, but go home and feel like they don't belong in a community. And that's absolutely unacceptable no matter where you are. Yeah. You should feel safe, welcome, and included in the community that you're not only visiting or shopping in, but living in. You shouldn't have to go out and face things like that, regardless of where you're from.
Yeah, and Ron, I think it's important to note that populations in the towns and villages in Alberta are declining. And their sustainability is going to be hinged on the welcoming and inclusion of newly landed Canadians, immigrants. And so every resident in those town and village has to get over whatever prejudices they have and greet these people with a smile and welcome them to the community, because that's going to be the sustainability of Alberta. And especially in the smaller towns and villages, they tend to land at the international airport in Edmonton and Calgary, and they stay there. But we need to get them out to the towns and villages, and it's Tyler and Cathy's and Angela's job to make them feel welcome.
Yeah, I've had really interesting conversations over the years with your former colleague Barry Morishita, former mayor of Brooks, who's talked a lot about
Brooks. Does a great job.
Brooks has done, but it's a huge immigrant population in Brooks, but that's been part of that community's lifeblood. I don't know if it's fair to describe Brooks as dying on the vine, but I've got family and friends that live there and I've seen it. So let me just say, I'm not blowing smoke. I mean it sincerely. And then Mayor Duncan, we'll give last word to you, but I'm just one of the reasons I'm so grateful for and there's a reason why we keep bringing you guys back. This panel, this Alberta Municipalities Real Talk Roundtable, is because you're seeing it. The audience, you're hearing it, you're seeing it. These are these are municipal political leaders that actually like legitimately care about their communities. We're hearing Mayor Gandam's insights on racism in his community as someone who faced racism in his community. And I think of one of the things that I get concerned about I don't know about you, listener, but one of the things I get concerned about to a great degree is the tone of politics these days. And like I talked about it earlier today with Dr. Bradley Martin, what works and what resonates with people. And it's not a good thing. The anecdotal evidence. And I mean, I know I use anecdotes on the show all the time, and they're true. I'll say, oh, my buddy told me this yesterday, and that's one person's perspective. But that doesn't make it set in stone, God speak truth. That's a talking point. And I find a lot of politics right now is people leveraging emotion and anecdotal evidence to steer people a certain way for that individual or that party's political gain. And it's getting us nowhere fast. And I really appreciate the spirit and the tone of these conversations because it's acknowledging the ills or the challenges that we're facing, but there's this optimism. There's almost a defiance in a way of people refusing to see their communities poisoned by some of these challenges. And so I wanted to say that while the three of you are still here, because I think it's important for you to feel the encouragement to know that the approach that you're taking to your politics, it might not be as bombastic. There's not going to be 1.5 million views of this interview. There'll be a good number, but not 1.5 million because none of you are roasting people or saying these inflammatory and divisive things. But you're approaching this with a responsible spirit, and I think that's so important. Mayor Duncan, I want to give last word to you and whatever. If the other two of you want to jump in and offer something in closing, that's fine. But I'm taking you over time. I recognize your schedules are important. Mayor Duncan, everything we've said here, in particular racism, hate crime, etc. I know I keep returning to the theme, but I'm doing it on purpose. Let me guess, Alberta Beach, not immune.
No, we are definitely not immune. It's not something we'd like to talk about. It's something that I think historically my community's kind of shied away from the conversations. Of course, with the upcoming papal visit, we're talking a lot more about racism, more in the concept of reconciliation. But I will say we have seen over the last number of years a significant increase in our visible minority population, in our immigrant population, which sometimes you get a bit of pushback from the community when you have more immigrants and visible minorities coming in. But as Mayor Heron mentioned, it is vital to the economic sustainability of rural Alberta to make sure that our population stops declining and actually grows. And in order to do that, we need to talk about bringing in immigrants into rural Alberta. So it's a conversation that we do have to have. I will say that over COVID, when things got quite divisive, we did see more issues in our community. We were being so close to Edmonton and being a recreational community. We had a lot of people coming through, 6,000-7,000 people a day coming through our downtown for a community of 900 some odd people. And we did see racism kind of rear its ugly head on our main beaches and in our parks. But my current council is tackling the issue specifically through reconciliation. And I think the first step is talking about it and acknowledging that there is an issue and that we do need to address it.
I wanted to thank the three of you for your time today. Is there anything that any of you has just burning? You want to throw something out there before I wish you a good weekend?
I'll just say thanks for those kind closing words you just had, Ryan. I mean, Tyler and Angela and I are very good friends. And when we're behind closed doors, that's when you want to get us on the screen, because we do talk about, we bitch and we complain, and the hatred goes, it goes towards, faces that we don't recognize, but it also goes to politicians. And so I appreciate those words that you just said, because we are doing our darndest to be collaborative and respectful level of government.
Yeah, and it's a fine line, right? It's a fine line between like being courteous and respectful and not taking people's shit. And when you can find that line, that's a great line to walk. We've been hearing from and speaking with Her Worship, the Mayor of St. Albert, Cathy Heron, His Worship, the Mayor of Wetaskiwin, Tyler Gandam, and Her Worship, Angela Duncan, the Mayor of Alberta Beach. Have a fabulous weekend, the three of you, and thanks for doing this.
You have a good weekend too, Ryan. Enjoy the sun.
Thanks, Ryan. Take care.
You bet. That's
Brian.
our Alberta Municipalities Roundtable. We really appreciate that. It's so important to check in with different communities and understand what's shaking.
We always go into OT with them, but it's just,
I know.
It's awesome. Like, a lot of people think like mayors, leaders of communities as kind of being like centered on all their own problems. It's awesome that they're all friends.
Totally.
They all help each other. They all know that their communities impact each other, right?
Yeah.
And I always am amazed at like some of the stats from these small communities, like you were saying, like double. Like,
it's wild in 2 years.
And just,
Totally wild.
They need more help.
Yeah.
Period.
Mayor Gandam, something slipped under the radar. He says, I'm mayor here for at least 3 more years, kind of hinting at maybe a re-election bid. But I don't know. That wasn't on me to pursue at that point. We're going to get to trash talk in just a second. I'm also going to read Angie's email. It's a powerful one.
We're going into OT.
The mom of a person who uses drugs. We're going way into OT today.
I had a Red Bull. I'm good to go. Let's get it.
Yeah. How's that Red Bull sitting with you right now, by the way?
Don't.
It's sugar-free. I put sugar-free in the
Don't
fridge.
do Red Bull in the morning. This was the worst idea I've ever had.
Yeah, all right.
A little shaky over here. Let's do some trash talk.
Don't you need the vodka to balance it out? That's why vodka. You need the up and the down. The up and the down. Eden Landscaping. They're like, did you really just roll heavy into our? Yeah, that's right. I did. I suspect that the team that's working the shovels and all the other tools that they use to these custom landscapes, they're probably crushing the odd Red Bull.
Tons.
Yeah,
they're
working a limited time. You start giving people cases of Red Bull as a thank you. I don't know what that says. Eden Landscaping specializes in the custom design and installation of landscapes in the Edmonton area. They've been doing it for more than 2 decades. Their skills have evolved from like basic projects to full scope, magazine ready landscapes. And they believe that well-designed and well-constructed landscapes should do more than just cross items off a wish list, right? It's a thoughtful balance. They want your vision to blend and work with a cohesive aesthetic direction. It doesn't just stand up over time. It evolves as it matures. The landscape design actually becomes more beautiful, more enjoyable as the years pass, right? As the perennials really grow, as the trees start to fill in. If you don't already have a landscape designer or an architect, they will find, guaranteed, the right fit for your unique style. They contract it all, and they only partner with the best. You can find Eden Landscaping online at landscapeedmonton.ca. Angie wrote in yesterday following my conversation with Mark Cherrington, a human rights advocate. Mark is just an unbelievable guy. He's been a friend of mine for many years, and it felt like the right time to bring him on yesterday. We talked to a high-profile politician in Danielle Smith. I want to talk to an everyman, an every person, somebody who just every single day is pounding the pavement, taking calls on his personal cell phone, helping people. You know something, a number, you want to talk about stats, a number that I didn't drop in Mark's introduction yesterday that I thought I probably should. I tweeted about it later. He keeps track of who he helps. He keeps files. He wants to be able to look back on it. You see this over 30 years of advocacy. He figures he's helped 24,000 people. Unbelievable. So Angie writes in to talk@ryanjesperson.com. She says, I'm the founder of 4B Harm Reduction Society, and I'm a member of Moms Stop the Harm. You've heard them on the show before. Angie says 4B is a nonprofit mobile street team, and we focus on Edmonton's core in our home city. She says we hand out, safer use supplies, snacks, water, naloxone that people can use to reverse drug poisonings, even service navigation to the community. They connect people with resources. She says we also provide community training and harm reduction info to the public. So you want to learn how to administer naloxone? We should all be able to do it. You never know when you're going to need to know how to administer naloxone. This is our reality, friends. And she says what I'm most proud of is the connection we're able to share. We're able to share information about drugs and what we're seeing in the community. And we try to bring back humanity where there isn't much. She says, my son has been a drug user, and he's currently without a home. He's here in the Edmonton City Center. He was in East Hastings, that district in Vancouver, for many years. And this is kind of, I guess, my way of connecting with him and spreading some mom love. She says, I want to thank you for your interview with Mark yesterday, Cherrington, and bringing the story of our community members and my child to light. And I appreciate it. There are no words to describe how bad it is out there. I've advocated for my son for many years, but under this government's recovery-based care, accessing help for my child has been almost impossible, and I fear I will lose him soon. Imagine typing that. She says, I wish people understood that these are somebodies. These are people. These are somebody's someone. And it affects so many people, it's heavy. So when I see people or when I see shows like Real Talk telling these stories, it gives me a bit of hope because things are pretty bleak right now. Thanks for everything and take care. That from Angie. We love you. And thank you for this, Angie. Now, every Friday, we wrap up our week of shows with an opportunity to blow off a little bit of steam. And John, as has been the case with the show today, going overtime, I have some water here beside me because this trash talk's going to go overtime as well. People are all fired up based on a couple of interviews we had on the show this week. This is presented by our friends at Local Environmental Services. You can find them online. Just visit the sponsors tab on our website. It's a tradition we call Trash Talk. All right, this one from Steph, who says, I love Real Talk, I love Supriya, and I love Erica Eiffel that was on the day, and I love your editorial board, and I love Johnny, and I love all of it. And she says, but I'm pissed. She says, I call bullshit on your conversation about Edmonton Oiler Evander Kane. If any woman has photographed evidence of an assault by an athlete, then that athlete is a criminal, not a badly behaved man boy. 10 years from now, we're going to look back and realize how wrong it was to view these people as athletes first, or athletes with flaws, or athletes with problems who get to skate, as in skate the law, just like any other man. No means no and a whole lot more, says the woman who's watching women's rights fall and regress. Is it okay? What? Because you can score goals, you can make touchdowns, you can hit home runs, you can make your team a lot of money? No, it's not okay. And these junior hockey players from Team Canada with that gang assault must face consequences. Why are we even having this conversation? She says, forgive me if this is not super professional, but sometimes, she says, you gotta speak out. That from Steph, and I agree with you, Steph. This one from Megan, who says, Ryan, Johnny, I've been mulling over your Evander Kane discussion. I was going to leave it, but I have to say it. We are all the reason why toxic guys keep playing in the NHL. We are the reason for the Chicago Blackhawks and Evander Kane and a woman being gang raped by the Canadian junior team, of whom by process of elimination, a lot of these guys are playing in the NHL right now. She says in a lot of other stories, we, says Megan, enable behavior. We have adopted that win at all costs mentality. We buy tickets, merch, we watch the games on TV, we listen to the sports shows, etc. There is zero incentive for any organization or player to change their behavior. There are no consequences because organizers know that people will keep tuning in and buying stuff, and it's shameful. In fact, shame on all of us. She says, I was guilty too. I was a ride or die fan of the Vancouver Canucks for most of my life. I lived in Vancouver during the last Cup run. It was awful to go downtown for work and see the destruction the next morning because of a fucking game. Ride or die ended for me there. She says, so where did we all get it so wrong? She says, Hockey Canada, the league, its players, commentators, reporters do not care about domestic violence. They don't seem to care about criminal activity, racism, homophobia. Do not care. I can't stomach it any longer. She says, now I'm in Edmonton, and you can catch me at Stingers basketball, FC Edmonton soccer, and Riverhawk baseball games. You will not see me at an Oilers game. I loved hockey, and it did not love me back. That from Megan. What about this one from Christy, who wrote in to say, she's gone off the rails, completely off the rails. She used to be such a smart, practical woman. Holy shit. That from Christy. I wonder who she's talking about. How about this one from Brad, who wrote in to say, Jesperson, this fixation, your conversation with Danielle Smith on turning everything into a mental health crisis. My mental health was affected by my government's complete incompetence and disregard of science. Had they been serious about this emergency, this impact on kids, the impact on Albertans would be less. Says this constant comparison to like COVID and influenza is so disingenuous. The world doesn't isolate at home for the flu season, and fuck you to anyone that stays on this. Oh yeah, and everything is the federal government's fault. Alberta freedom. I want to fight somebody, says Brad. Brad, don't. He says, education. If a mom with 9 kids wants a professional, send them to school. Imagine the disparity in education if we start schooling kids in people's basements. Can I even believe I'm writing this, wonders Brad? And then he goes on to just say, this big tent idea, it's clearly too big. Some people need to be shunned. This misinformation is harming people. Rebel media is not right-leaning media. It's an activist group. It's the Greenpeace of the right wing. That's going to get some people going. He says, Danielle Smith is going to be so good for her lawyer pals. He says, how can I discuss this with a person that subscribes to the ideas or shares commonalities with Theron Fleury? I can't form the words to express how shitty that interview made me feel about everything. That from Brad. What about this from Tyler, who says, my body, my choice, right? Equating women's reproductive rights to the right to choose a vaccine. As Jespo pointed out, pregnancy is not contagious. Being sexually assaulted and choosing to terminate a pregnancy is akin to somebody, not being able to fly because they weren't vaccinated? That's the logical conclusion here. I don't have a uterus. I'm not qualified to comment on somebody's choices for their reproductive health, but it seems to me that some of these people have no concept of how vaccines work, so kindly drink a nice glass of shut the hell up! Give your head a shake. What's next? Flat Earth support? People so gullible thinking the Earth is a sphere? Sheeple. What are we going to do? Ban contractions? The use of apostrophes? Blaming Ottawa? Liberal elites pushing a grammar agenda? That from Tyler, who took it in an interesting direction out of the end. And Sharon finally wraps up by saying, and I love that she gives us the context, I'm sitting in my room eating chocolate-covered pretzels and thinking of that insane interview you just did with Danielle Smith. This is the first time I've emailed you. I'm so sick and tired of the adversary approach to politics. Blame Rachel Notley, blame Justin Trudeau, blame science, blame Alberta Health Services. When does the time come for accountability? Didn't Jim Prentice tell people to look in the mirror? One thing that's always overlooked, we are the politicians' bosses. We elect the fuckers. Are we going to let somebody like that come into our house and be a homewrecker? Huh? Change the curriculum and then allow kids to be taught like they live in the 1800s? Why? Because one woman mentioned it to her? And then attack Alberta Health Services? I mean, we all question Dr. Hinshaw and the provincial government even more. But when will this chaos end? When everybody stands up and votes their asses out of here with their tails between their legs? Thank you, she says. That feels better. And she says, by the way, I'd still love to meet you for coffee sometime. That from Sharon. Hey, you never know, Sharon. We're still looking forward to the first ever Real Talk tailgate party. Coming up next week, we're going to get back to a lot of the issues, not just national issues, not just provincial issues, but some of the big international stories we need to be following. We're going to follow up on some stories that have resonated with you. And of course, we'll have more of your emails sent into talk@ryanjesperson.com. If something on a positive note has made your day, we want to hear about it. You could be featured on Monday in Positive Reflections, presented by Kubi Energy. Stay safe out there this weekend, everybody. May your tee shots be straight. May your barbecuing be perfect. And we'll see you back here live or later Monday morning on Real Talk.
Real Talk is hosted by Ryan Jesperson.
Executive producer, Josh Dunford. Technical producer, John Hicks. General manager, Katie Cook-Shivers. Account coordinator, Lawrence Derlego. Human resources, Lena Shepard.
Website design, Mike Johnston. Voiceover by me, Carrie Skelton. Real Talk's editorial board is Supriya Dwivedi, Ahmed Ali,
Brandy Morin,
Ann Castleman, Corey Hogan, Harmon Candola, Catherine O'Neill, and Chris Henderson. Member Emerita, Julie Rohr. Real Talk is recorded in Edmonton, Alberta on Treaty 6 territory, the traditional and ancestral territory of the Cree, Dene, Blackfoot, Saulteaux, and Nakota Sioux, home to Métis settlements and the Métis Nation of Alberta. Real Talk is the flagship property of Relay Communications Group Incorporated. All rights reserved. For more, check out ryanjesperson.com.